Hello and welcome to the Report It Now Global Podcast, your window into the world of ethics and compliance. I'm Jonathan Cotton, and today we are joined by Report It Now Chairman and Director, Mr. Craig McFarlane. Now, when it comes to building ethical companies, Craig certainly knows what he's talking about. As one of Report It Now's foundation shareholders, he's been instrumental in developing the brand from a startup all the way back in 2007, and we're absolutely delighted to have him here today. We're going to be discussing the ethical reporting landscape out there, some of the challenges organisations face when implementing Speak Up programs. We're going to talk about the importance of leadership buy-in and a little bit about what the future holds for the industry. There's lots to cover, so let's dive right in. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start at the beginning. What was the genesis of Report It Now? What was the inspiration behind the company, and how did it all get started?
Okay, it was less about me. It was a group of people, actually, Jonathan. So one of the foundation shareholders, a guy called Keith Johnson, was the HR director of a business that I was the CEO of. And he mentioned that there was a gap in the market in this. And I said, I think I can help develop something in that space. Another colleague who ran the IT department, his partner was very keen. And we had a look at what was in the marketplace. And there was nothing. So there was nothing particularly in New Zealand. Then when you looked at the global market, in 2007 when we started, it was very, very embryonic. Some people thought we had rocks in our head, thinking about why would someone want that? And that kind of evolves probably into a conversation that we have a little bit later about why people would have such a service in place in their business and why some don't, which is always really interesting. So what happened was we developed this business. We got some foundation blue chip clients. Some of our first clients were publicly listed companies and still are clients. We had some clients since 2007. And the business just blossomed from there. And we as a group thought very early on in the piece that there's a software component of this which was really, really important. That's when Greg Dunn joined the business as a shareholder. Bearing in mind, I was kind of just a commercial guy. We had an HR shareholder, really got the people component. Greg came in, and Greg was a senior police officer in the New Zealand Police. And he brought some real structure in how you manage compliance and how you work your way really sequentially and in a very processed way through an investigation and how you manage things. So we started off with a small software vendor. We developed some proprietary software right from the very start in 2007. Then when Greg arrived, we decided that was probably not fit for purpose. It was a great launching pad. And then we partnered with a company called Valencia Tech, and they develop everything in partnership with us. So Greg and Suzanne Bull have both been the really big drivers of the evolution of the software.
Yeah. So how has Greg's background in the New Zealand Police Force helped tease out those processes? What's the difference that makes?
So I don't know enough about the police force to know how they operate intimately, but what he's brought is really good sound processes and how you methodically work your way through, one, making a submission, two, how it's managed, and then how external parties, with our Ethics Pro software, external parties can also be provided access. So, for example, an investigator or a lawyer or whomever, third parties can be provided access, and so that all of the data is in one place for the client. So Greg brought all of that. That's his expertise in being able to develop really clear process flows, how we deal with people that make submissions anonymously. So our software allows anonymous submissions. Someone that wants their employer made aware of who they are when they're making a submission. So we provide full raft. So how people want to make a submission, whether it's a web form, whether it's by phone, whether it's by WhatsApp, whether it's by whatever method, we're pretty easy in how we allow the person ultimately to make a submission, because quite clearly one of the barriers is people get to make a submission about someone, an allegation, and then they go to do it and it all gets too hard.
Yeah. So just before we move on from those early days, what was it like attracting those first clients? What were the problems they were dealing with, and what was it like sort of convincing them to invest in a new player like Report It Now?
Yeah, great question. So what we find with clients who use our services, they either want it, so they're visionary and they want it, and they understand why providing such a service to their team members is important. So they really get the value of it. So what is the value? The value is that if you have people and you have a culture where people are encouraged to make submissions, and then submissions are dealt with in an appropriate manner, meaning speed, feedback, and that there is no retribution. So those are the key things. So these companies were visionary in 2007 to say, this is the culture that this organisation wants. We don't profess to be the silver bullet, that everyone must have an ethical reporting service, and that is your solution. It's part of a suite of options. If you've got an ethical reporting service and you've got a very poor culture and the ethics submissions are flooded and you don't do anything about it, that's probably worse than not having a service, right? So it's that mix of making sure that you've got the culture right, so that if you get a submission, you do something about it, and that it's just part of the suite of things that you do. So those clients got it from a vision and values around how they wanted their people to feel, and that the senior managers weren't hiding behind hierarchy, saying these are our values to the team members, but then in behind the scenes, everyone talking about them, they're not living and breathing the values. All of those clients live and breathe.
Mm. So how do you identify organisations that have that vision? Is there a tipping point there in terms of size or, headcount? Do they have things in common?
So no, nothing specific. So the key component, Jonathan, is that that they have strong values. So huge variation. So public listed to small to medium sized but enterprises, some small, right? So it is it's very, very cliched, but it's a real commitment to what they say they're going to do. And if you make a submission, we'll do something about it. So some have retail environments. So you can imagine a large publicly listed retail environment where they have the most complex of loss prevention methods in place. Report It Now and Ethics Pro and ethical reporting is a small component of that. Very, very small. But it all fits in tightly like a lovely glove. And so when they get a submission through Ethics Pro, their ethics committee addresses the issue, and it might coincidentally link into something else that has occurred that they can then go and reference via a video, something that they've seen on video that they were suspicious about. So it's just all part of the portfolio of things that they use. So what do they have? They have leaders leading from the top. They have leaders where there's executive teams who think it's the proverbial cluster mess of, I have to publicly state what our values are, but I don't really believe it. Well, they get kicked to the curb very quickly. So it's cliches about alignment, but all of the businesses where we get the most submissions are where the leader leads from the top. and they're not scared of people speaking up.
So how common is it to encounter leaders that have that vision? I mean, do you often sit down, in a meeting and think, man, guys, your heart just isn't in this?
Absolutely. So in this space, the really difficult thing for us as people that are involved in the business day to day are having clients that are intimately involved in ethics, believe it, live and breathe it, and then some that want to be able to stamp it and put it in a report. So a really good indicator, Jonathan, is 4 submissions per 100 FTEs per annum is good practice. That's the number. So if someone is listening to this and they want to go away and they go, well, I think we've got pretty cool values and I love what we do, and I think we're a pretty transparent organisation, have a look at the number of submissions. So what do you have in place? So the old story, if you have an internal speak up line, that's great. That's better than nothing, right? If you have an external ethical partner, you increase the submissions by between 40 and 50%. So it's a huge change in numbers. And then if you look at it, if you're just running something internally and you're getting 10 submissions per 100 FTEs per annum, you've got a great ethical, you've probably got great ethics, good values, people trust you. If you're somewhere in that 0 to 4, you need to have a good, strong look at yourself and ask, what can I do? And one of the things that you can do, this isn't a sell job, one of the things you can do, because it's not about Report It Now and Ethics Pro, it's about you can implement and have an external service provider.
Yeah. So why is an external service provider so valuable? Why not just feed all of the stuff to HR and say, if there's a problem, HR will deal with it?
Quite simply, trust. That's it. So why? Because you can speak to an external party, and you have a guarantee that it's anonymous. You have if you choose to have it anonymously, or you can trust that if we've spoken to the business and we've committed to delivering this service to those people, that's what they can expect, right? So what's the difference? Fundamentally, trust, because commonly someone has tried to set up an internal system and they've been let down. And what are the things that let people down most commonly? Someone else hears about it that shouldn't hear about it. So trust, right? Retribution, fear of retribution. So we if someone's anonymous, clearly they aren't named, there's no fear of retribution. We can manage a whole submission no matter how complex, and there's no fear of retribution if they're anonymous. The best, what would we advocate for if we had the most perfect client? The most perfect client would say, I want to accept anonymous and very public submissions. So they accept any submission in effect. And then what we do with our clients is we set up an ethics committee internally, so it's not reliant on one person. It's reliant. So what commonly happens? It goes to HR. HR look at it in their very HR way, which is sometimes fine, sometimes quite myopic, and then they decide to do something. What we ask our clients to do is have a cross section of people. So if on the ethics committee there's Jonathan and there's Craig and there's Greg, and there's a submission about Greg, who's on the ethics committee, he's automatically excluded by way of the software. The software automatically removes Greg having any access to that. Then what happens is you and I manage it on behalf of our organisation, and we work our way through ensuring that the submission is clear, and then we investigate. Okay, so then that is a record that cannot be removed. That takes out any form of, well, it dilutes the opportunity for retribution because there's a clear record of the allegations that have been made.
Yeah, great. Just thinking about this, having this logical anonymous process in place is great, but surely it's only half the battle, isn't it? I mean, what goes into communicating that these options are here and that this is encouraged, and letting people know that speaking up about, issues they encounter in the workplace is okay and encouraged?
Exactly right. So what happens? Person X makes a submission. They may have made the submission by phone, by WhatsApp, by our web form. A person phones that person back and verifies and validates the submission, and puts the allegation in a form that the ethics committee can read very carefully and very easily. Okay, so that's the first part. That person that has made the submission, whether it's anonymous or whether they're comfortable being named, gets a code. They can then log into the Ethics Pro software anytime they like using that verification code. Now, it's multi-factor authenticated, so they need to work their way through access, but they can have access to it, and they can have a look at where the investigation or the report is at any time. And that works its way through right to the completion. Now, in the most anonymous form, the person that has made the allegations or the submission can communicate with the employer the whole time in a Q&A and not be identified. So what competitive software does is they can make the submission anonymously. It then becomes really challenging how you to and fro through an investigation, and commonly a person will feel compromised because they have to, in effect, identify who they are, either inadvertently or the process drives that. So, and a really good example, we've got a client with 120 retail stores. So tens of thousands of employees, very complex in hierarchies and structures. Our software works really easily with a really complex environment like that.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned a moment ago, multi-channel reporting. I know it's something that Report It Now speaks about a lot. Why is that important? Why bother with multi-channel?
It's kind of like least path of resistance stuff, as mentioned earlier. What we want is a client that is truly committed to this wants submissions. They don't not want submissions. So they want to exceed that 4 times 100 FTEs per annum. So what do? You have to open up as many channels as possible. So least path of resistance, and it needs to be easy. So a really good example, manufacturing environment with a corporate office. The manufacturing environment, the person might be doing cumbersome, very heavy lifting all day, don't have access to the electronic equipment that someone might have in a corporate office. So you need to make it easy for someone working in a galvanizing business or a freezing works or an abattoir or whatever to be able to make a submission with the same ease that a person can in a corporate environment. It's about access, right? And providing access. Easy access allows for more submissions.
Nicely put, Craig. How many employees are protected under the Report It Now banner currently?
Over 50,000 employees.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, and that's not just in New Zealand. So some of our clients have subsidiaries around the globe. We work with whatever is required within those jurisdictions around data protection, and we work with the client in setting up whatever is required for those multi-jurisdictional requirements. So I've in excess of 50,000 FTEs, and we're getting hundreds of submissions per month.
Wow, very impressive. So what does the typical implementation process look like? Could you maybe walk us through how it would usually go?
Good question. So as long as the client wants to take. Some clients actually have an investigation underway when they touch base with us. So sometimes we are the proverbial ambulance at the bottom of the cliff trying to rectify a situation. So we can implement it virtually straight away. So it's all pretty easy. Most clients take sort of in the 2 to 3 week range, Jonathan. Why? Because forming of an ethics committee is quite challenging for some organisations. How they get appropriate representation. So, in large organisations with hierarchies, we kind of set up hierarchies of who get notified. So, in an organisation where they truly believe in what they're doing and their values, some notifications at the highest level may go to the chair of the board. Some may go to the CE. Some at a mid-level may go to the HR team and the ethics committee. Why? Because sometimes people outside of the HR team are just as good at talking about an issue that has come up, how it's resolved. It may be wider spread. So ethics submissions aren't necessarily always about people issues. Sometimes they're about hotspots. They're about global hotspots or locational hotspots where things are happening. The organisation may have seen some supply chain variances, and they may look at absenteeism, and then all of a sudden they're starting to get some ethical reports out of that same location. So it provides people with the opportunity to pull all of the cues that they might get to problems, discuss them, and work out a plan how they're going to resolve them, or how they're going to investigate them in most cases.
Yeah. Reading between the lines here, Craig, a successful rollout must really rest on the enthusiasm or the buy-in from higher ups, right?
Absolutely. So that's the key. That's the number one, right? So how do you do that? And the best rollouts that we experience are where the leaders lead it from the top. They talk about it. They talk about it formally and informally. It's, when they hit the landing page for their co-branded submission page, there's a letter there from the CE or the chair or the senior executive team around how important it is to them. Please work your way through this process. Living and breathing this value is really, really important for us.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah. You hear a lot about the fear experienced by people making a submission, but there must be, a degree of trepidation from, people who are afraid of being exposed as well, right?
Oh, it's more common than we like it to be. But that's about, that's what makes the world go round. Meaning, you can't, you don't want, the worst thing you can have in any organisation is a leader and a whole bunch of disciples, right? That cower to the Messiah leader, right? The Messiah leadership thing is dead and buried. It still occurs though, right? Or people are scared about what happens if I speak up, those sorts of things. So what you need is some common values that everyone buys into, right? And then if someone is not living and breathing those, people should feel comfortable calling it out. And so that applies to senior leadership as well. A whole system like this gets undermined considerably if you've got a CE at the top that is preaching about what the values are, and then the senior leadership team, half them do and half them don't. Well, what would normally happen is people would start making submissions about those individuals who aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been in the game since, 2007. How has the landscape changed in that time? Are enterprise owners more open to the idea that, reports are a good thing, transparency is a good thing?
Most definitely. So as cultures evolve in businesses and there's considerably more research on, what an ideal culture looks like without it being, scripted, it's definitely changing. And that's why our business is growing exponentially. That's why we're expanding into Australia. That's why we're about to expand into the Northern Hemisphere. So, yes, it's definitely changing, but we still have, recently I was in a director's environment where we're talking about ethical reporting, and one really high-profile managing director of a publicly listed company said, "Why would I want that?" And I said, "Well," and talked away like we've been talking. And he said, "Well, that'd be admitting that we've got some issues." So, again, that's what makes the world go round. Some people think like that. They think that someone speaking up is not good for their business, when in fact, a really quick calculation that you can make, probably about 5%, the equivalent of 5% of your gross revenue is being misappropriated. So whether that's stolen labour hours, supply chain, unethical behaviour, the whole myriad of things that people can do, quick calculation, 5% of your gross revenue is probably being misappropriated. This helps. This is not the silver bullet. Report It Now is not the silver bullet, but we help.
Yeah. So given that it's fundamentally about people, for those organisations who are listening that think, we've got work to do here, what is the key to bringing people into alignment with sort of better ethical practices? What's the secret to winning hearts and minds, Craig?
Well, the only way you can win those hearts and minds is showing them and doing what you say you're going to do, right? So it's all pretty simple. So for those that don't have any system in place, any service in place, whether it's internal or external, is to just start, right? And then you build from there. Most of our clients, and particularly those right from the very start that are still clients, have always started off with an internal system and a values system that align to that they always wanted. So start off with an internal system, maybe, as an option. Otherwise, look at, if you want to go big straight away, speak to people like Report It Now, us, and we can help you out. So we have a myriad of templates that can help you, how you launch a program, how you step your way through the comms program, all of those types of things. We can help you with. So that's part of, as you asked the question a little earlier about the rollout plan. Our rollout plan has how you communicate to the team, what they need to know about what they have to do to make a submission, etc., and what happens after they've made the submission. So transparency all the way through how the whole relationship works.
Okay, so let's say you've got your software implemented, people are on board with what you're doing, you're working according to best practice. What then are the KPIs? How do you measure the success of these sorts of programs?
Well, the biggest and strongest indicator is the number of submissions that they get.
Yeah.
So there's no point in overcome. There's a whole lot of additional, more complex metrics, right? But the most obvious is how many submissions you're receiving.
Yeah. What was the number you gave me before? It was 4 submissions per 100 FTEs per annum. I can imagine for larger enterprises, your reporting platform can be quite a busy conduit. What advice do you have for people who are dealing with these reports who, need to be as efficient as possible?
one of the things that we tend to do, particularly in large organisations where they are getting a lot of submissions, is we set up an administrator. So it's an administrator for the ethics committee. So that person triages the importance of the submission, and then they round up the ethics committee members that the submission applies to. So what's the value of that? The value of that is not one person is making the decision. So if you've got an ethics committee, you and I can discuss it. You and I might have quite different views. Ultimately, our objective is to come together, come up with a solution that we think is good for both of us.
Yeah. And I guess there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that's got to be sort of training, communication, and education, right? How important is that in ensuring success?
So one of the biggest things where organisations that are showing high levels of commitment to implementation, but it doesn't quite work out how they planned, is they forget that they need to have, and we recommend annualised training and development. So what does annualised training and development mean? It means training for the board, for the chair on the board. What does ethical reporting mean to that business if they have a board in place? To the executive team, to the CE or the leader and the executive team, what does ethics mean to them? And then more generically, what does ethics mean to the wider team? And then what are the things that we provide around having these values and these ethics? It means this sort of behaviour is unacceptable. If you see that type of behaviour, here's the options of how you manage that behaviour. So Report It Now can work with a client and they can make submissions as broad or as narrow as they want it to be. Many companies have health and safety software, so they don't want their health and safety metrics compromised by having some other software. So they might say, we want to ring fence health and safety out to the side. We want this software. We've invested in this. This is for everything else. That's fine. Report It Now doesn't not take health and safety submissions. What we'll do is we'll then refer it as a health and safety, and it'll get banked into the health and safety software. So we kind of manage the breadth, the width of the submissions, whatever a client wants.
Yeah, great. Now, I just want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, and that is Report It Now's expansion plans. Tell me, Craig, what are the big goals for you guys? What's on the immediate agenda in terms of, Report It Now's global reach?
We've just launched in Australia, so got an office in Melbourne. Launching in Australia, we'll manage that. Greg and I will be in Australia very regularly to manage that part of the business. And then in the next 12 months, our plan is to go to the UK. We've got, we were thinking about Singapore. I lived in Singapore for a few years. So Singapore is also on the radar. But so Australia will be the first cab off the rank, or is the first cab off the rank. We're already doing business in Australia. So we already had subsidiaries that we're providing services to in Australia, so that's a reasonably easy transition for us. The UK is a much bigger step.
Yeah. And, it's a rapidly evolving industry, isn't it, Craig? What do you see as the big shifts happening? What do you see as the big trends for the future?
When you look at all of the regulations that are being implemented in different jurisdictions, so you look at Europe, they've got one overarching regulation policy in place, but then 50 jurisdictional interpretations of it. So how do we work with it? Every client already has data. So if they're a multinational and they're in Europe or they're in Australia, they'll already be managing their data. So the key thing about data is where you keep the data and how secure it is. So what do? We do a bunch of security checks, independent security checks of our software on, at a minimum, on an annualized basis, but on a very, very regular basis. We do a bunch of security reviews. So all sorts of really clear reviews that we undertake. We're ISO accredited. So we do a whole bunch of things that make us do things that we should be doing anyway, that are coincidentally accredited. And then when it comes to client-specific activity, we work with whatever their requirements are for their organisation. So data security, quite obviously, is pretty crucial. And that's why we have very regular testing, and we use an external party for that to ensure that we're as tight as we can possibly be.
Good stuff. There you have it, folks. That's the Report It Now podcast for this month. Big thank you to our guest, Craig McFarlane, and a big thanks to you too for tuning in. If you like what you've heard here, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and feel free to reach out if you've got any questions, comments, or criticisms. Your feedback is very much appreciated. Or if you've got a suggestion for a future guest, please let us know. That's it from us. Till next time, I'm Jonathan Cotton. This was the Report It Now Global Podcast. Thanks for being a part of it. Catch you next time.